Okay, we'd like to introduce now Ivon Arroyo, the Assistant Professor in Computer Science Department at the University of Massachusetts, and also an Assistant Professor in the College of Education at the same university. And she will present her research on the bilingual tutor. Yeah, and he's talking Spanish. Mira.
Hi. Hi, so I'm going to present some work on the idea of a bilingual mathematics intelligent tutoring system. Some of the work has been done, some of the work is future work, but I thought that that's probably what we should be talking about, also the future, right? So it's also a paper, the result of a paper that got accepted at a conference now in February to be presented. So and it's about a mathematics intelligent tutoring system in Spanish. And so the motivation and thinking of NSF, right, but of course across the world, right, there's in the United States, there's about 22% of residents that speak a language at home that is other than English. And in this talk, I'm just going to focus on this group about Hispanic and Latinos that are the largest majority in the country, about 65 million people, which has quadrupled since the 80s and continues to grow. At the same time, Hispanics and Latinos are highly underrepresented in the STEM workforce. They constitute about 8% of STEM workers. And I'm using Hispanic and Latinos interchangeably, but in general, referring to people who have ancestry from Latin America and some even Spain. If we were talking Hispanic, if we're talking Latinos, it's just the Americas. At the same time, when you think of students and the younger people at the K-12 level, those who migrate into the United States and do not speak English are often placed into settings where they are taught in English, sometimes not, but the instructions many times is in English. And mathematics teachers in particular are unprepared to teach English learner classes where they're placed and they have students speaking different languages, and I've been told sometimes they're signaling with them, completely unprepared to deal with the situation that is growing. So in terms of learning technologies and thinking of learning technologies that are equitable, when we think of ITS or learning technologies that are English only, there's really a missed opportunity for educating citizens here in the US and across the world, right? So we could make transitions smoother for immigrant students such as Latinos and Hispanics. And when I'm saying in Spanish, it's much more than translation, but here what I'm talking about is about localization to a culture or subculture. And when we're thinking of intelligent tutoring systems, cognitive tutors, there's some strengths, and particularly in personalization, where it can help to fill students' gaps wherever they are, especially they are coming from different countries, different curricula, and they can support students not only cognitively but affectively. And the issue of accessibility is important. We could tailor the language, and in the case of MathSpring, there's free availability on the web. And also an important aspect is the respect for students' identities, right? Which is why it's so important to go beyond translation, but using representations as the STEM material that are really validating their identities, such as the avatars, the digital avatars. But in this case, I'm going to talk about MathSpring, that is an intelligent tutoring system that is online, is freely available for the time being, at least. It's game-like, where there's math gardens that students grow, and they grow with effort as opposed to mastery. And it's a multimedia intelligent tutoring system. It really talks to the student, has a lot of voice on audio support and animations. And it personalizes instruction where students move across grades seamlessly without realizing, based on a prerequisite structure of Common Core standards. And it also provides affective tutoring. There's these little characters that are learning companions that are empathic. They empathize with students as they go through episodes of frustration, for instance. And they importantly train growth mindset, which is the idea of perseverance and what's being called passion for long-term goals, really helping them to get through episodes where they're making mistakes and stumbling from an affective perspective. And what we know is that there's a lot of good effects in the United States in math learning and in emotions. For instance, in math learning, in smaller studies that involve one or a few schools, measures of academic progress tests, there's significant effects in comparison to control groups that are not using it during math class. And we have evidence of emotional outcomes. And right now we have a large DOE award and IES awards where we're working with 80 teachers in Massachusetts to measure its effectiveness at a larger scale. But we know that it really benefits students as a supplement to math class like this teacher is doing here, and both from a cognitive and an affective perspective. So when we're thinking more than translation, these are the questions that I'm interested in, the team is interested in. What does it entail, right, to localize the learning software to a certain culture or subculture? Is the localized software still effective after the localization, given at least the math, right? Is it still teaching math properly? And does it still have a positive affective impact given the goals that the Intelligent Tutor has, such as growth mindset training? So what I did was started a case study, a pilot study, and localized it to Córdoba, Argentina. And it's a province in Argentina. And in trying this, we faced all the obstacles that we were hoping to encounter to understand how challenging this could be. For instance, there's challenges of curriculum and math content differences. There's differences in notation where, for instance, the dot and the comma is used interchangeably. I mean, complete opposite as the United States. There's differences in curriculum. Some topics are taught in later grades. There's differences in the metric system as opposed to the imperial system, even though they're still doing unit conversion. So imagine what it is for an immigrant students from Latin America arriving in the United States with all of these differences, right? So we created a localized version of MathSpring, and we called it Cultivando Matemáticas, and it implied a lot of localization to the local language, not just to Spanish, but there's lots of variations in Spanish also. So to this particular Spanish, and we had the voices be recorded by Argentine people and also with the local accents. So you can see here the differences in the notation. And I just have a video that maybe I can play a little bit about so that you see that when there's differences in notation, there's differences even in the cities, in the context. These are a city close to the place. It's an Argentine city. When they answer incorrectly here, it's offering, highlighting the help buttons.
Como este año llovió más que el año pasado, tenemos que encontrar la diferencia. ¿Qué operación tenemos que usar?
So the student here could have asked for another help, but instead tries again.
Existen muchas maneras de aprender algo nuevo, más allá de cómo aprende cada uno, desafiándonos a nosotros mismos y forzándonos, obtendremos todas las habilidades que necesitamos para aprender cosas nuevas.
So the character decided to train growth mindset and emphasize perseverance here, and it's talking in the local accent, right? So there's also technical challenges associated to this. It's not just a matter of putting a translator in there. If you're thinking of translating a lot of the menus and certain parts, there's that can depend on the language of the browser, and use a technique called resource bundles to translate to a certain region. But when we're thinking of the mathematics content, it really implied a translation that is localized to the content, the curriculum, the notation, and including the learning companions. And it's all running in Amazon Web Services. There's a server side, there's a client side, and a lot of these math content depends on the settings of the math class. So there are different challenges there in the localization, technical challenges. So what we did was try Cultivando Matemáticas in 3 different schools in Córdoba, Argentina, about 150 students and their teachers. And we did have a mathematics pre-test and a post-test in Spanish, of course, for the questions corresponding to the topics in MathSpring. We also had affective measures, and in particular, we chose to give students a grit test, which is measuring really perseverance and passion for long-term goals. We were very careful at translating it into Spanish to really mean exactly the same thing. And then in the end, we work with teachers on deciding what topics should be there. And some of the topics, for instance, which are problem sets, and sets of standards correspond to earlier grades sometimes, such as fractions and equivalent fractions. And some of them were the same as what was corresponding to the 6 grades that were participating. But in some cases, like regarding unit conversions using the metric system, this was different than the US, but still aligned to the same standards. And in sometimes it was just not in the US. They don't really focus a lot on conversions of time as a topic, for instance. All of these problems were linked to the same structure and Common Core standards of the United States. And what we did was we gave them a pretest that was affective and cognitive at the end of August, and September, October, they did 5 math tutoring sessions instead of their math class. And at the end of October, we gave them a post-test. In 2/3, in 2 of the 3 schools, there were not enough computers for each student to work on. So here go the practical considerations about this. Practical challenges. We paired students and 2 students worked on 1 computer. So that was another challenge. Would the system still work and be effective with 2 students per computer? So what we saw was very positive. So students did improve significantly from the first day to the last day. And there was an effect size of 0.24. Of course, like they were in school, right? So one of the questions was, how valid is this? Because they were learning in school. However, we know that students spent most time in the system in the first topics that had to do with fractions. And that's where the gain was higher. So we believe that they did learn due to the system. More interestingly, we did measure grit as a post-test. And surprisingly, we saw a very significant effect in improving their perseverance and passion for long-term goals. And we believe that this is due to the growth mindset training that the characters were giving. So in general, just to sum up a little bit, it is both possible and feasible to implement the localization of intelligent tutoring systems such as MathSpring to a different language and culture. And while maintaining, still making the system effective. But of course, that was a pilot study. This is what I am interested in the long term, right? First of all, in writing grants and talking about this workshop, there's not an ideal place to send this grant proposal. So the idea is to understand, can we create a bilingual, multilingual tutoring system that is localized to Central North Latin America to support immigrant children and whose main language is not English? And interestingly, not really trying to follow a deficit model for English learners and thinking that they are the ones who need to learn English, but how is it that we address this idea of the multiple language situation? And one of the ideas is to have an intelligent tutoring system that pursues a double goal, teaching mathematics and language simultaneously. And I think that's the most interesting technical challenge, as when you're teaching 2 things at the same time, you might need to sacrifice one in favor of the other. And how would you do that? One of the ideas of making it not follow a deficit model for English learners is to have a knob where you can regulate the amount of Spanish and English you could have, and how you could choose to be taught or fade into one of the languages while starting in the other. So thinking about dual language instead of thinking of English learners. And another third question is how to create digital characters that reflect students' identities. And this is in relation to continued work of Daniela Alessio, who's here, and her work on creating digital avatars that they design, and they also make them speak as if they were a little puppet, right? Like Louis' work in the past a little bit, but how can we give them phrases that are really born from their language, gestures and modisms. So that is the this third question, how can we co-design with children these characters? So I think I'm going to sum up there. Am I on time? I think I'm fine. Is that right?
Definitely you have time, and we have time for questions. Or you want to say more? It's okay. Yo tengo el mismo problema en mi computadora. Nosotros estamos.